Alright guys, welcome back to the Property Source and Success podcast. We are in December. Today we're going to talk about something I think a lot of you guys think about, but you maybe don't always say out loud, which is I want to place my salary with property. In fact, a lot of you, I'd say inwardly think it. If you're listening to this podcast, I'd say this is the inner thoughts of a lot of you, but you're definitely not saying it out loud. And it's not because you want to replace your salary with property because you hate your work, although in many instances, in fact, that is true. And it's not because you're lazy, but it's because you're starting to realize that your entire life has been built around your job. And essentially you're done living like that, done, living to work, done being a weekend parent, done having absolutely zero time for yourself. So what I really want to do in today's episode is dig into 3 or 4 things. First thing is I want to have a look at the real why behind why you essentially want to pan in the 9 to 5. I want to have a look at what replacing your salary with property actually means in real life and not what they tell you it means on Instagram, because I can assure you there is a very big difference. We'll then have a look at some of the big fears and excuses that keep you stuck, and there are many, and you know it's true. And then we'll look at a simple way to start putting a bit of an action plan in place. And at the end of today's episode, I'm actually going to invite you on a live training I'm running next week, and I'm going to go deeper on this very topic, and more importantly, deeper on the how. How do I replace my salary with property in 2026? So with that in mind, let's kick off. But I suppose, look, we've had lots of new listeners over the last number of months. So a bit of a quick recap. If you are new to tuning into the podcast, hello. My name's Danielle, crazy Irish lady, but former financial analyst for the New York Stock Exchange, which on the face of it sounds very sexy, looks great on LinkedIn, but in reality, I was completely and utterly burnt out. I was bored. I was dealing with people that I could not stand, and I was quietly panicking that this corporate handcuff was going to be me until the ripe old retirement age. In 2016, I was on maternity leave, broke, very, very, very broke, in a lot of debt. That's a story and maybe a podcast for another day. But I remember sitting in my son's tiny box room nursery and thinking, if I go back and I just keep doing what I'm doing, then nothing's going to change. My son's going to get the constant, exhausted, distracted version of me for his entire childhood. And believe it or not, I started my property journey from that very box room nursery. I shit you not, I started it from his Paw Patrol, small blue Paw Patrol table. We have never thrown that table out, believe it or not. And he is almost 9 now, but we have it in the garage here at home, and I will not part with that Paw Patrol table because it signifies the start of something that completely changed our lives. We didn't have any savings when I kicked this business off. I didn't have an investor list. I had no rich relative that was keeping me afloat. But the silver lining to all of this is that within 13 months of kicking it off from that nursery room, from a Paw Patrol table that I could barely get a foot under, never mind knees under to sit at, I had not only replaced, but I had doubled my then corporate salary through property. And for the last 5 years, I have been helping hundreds of corporate professionals and business owners do something similar using deal sourcing and raising investor finance and building portfolios. So when I talk about this, guys, this is not theory. I have genuinely lived this, boots on the ground. I've watched a lot of other people live it, and I've also watched an awful lot of people stay stuck. So let's be honest. When you say, I want to replace my salary with property, you don't mean I'd love a slightly different way to pay my bills. Right? Like, that's not what we're aiming for here. What you really mean when you say, I'd like to replace my salary through property is, I don't want to continue to be the weekend parent that shows up here and there. I know I work with a lot of people who at one point in time worked offshore and felt like weekend parents. So when they came to me to get their property business off the ground, it was because they could no longer stomach the thought of being that kind of absent parent. Also, you don't want to still be at the mercy of, Outlook or Gmail or Teams meetings when you're sitting and you're 55. And you also don't want to stop feeling like your life and your time and what you get to do with your 28 days annual holiday leave belongs to everybody else. From the outside, I'd say for a lot of you guys who listen to this podcast from the outside, your life probably looks pretty comfortable, decent salary, fancy-ish job title that we've just put a bit of sheen on. Maybe even a LinkedIn profile. It seems like you're doing well, but I would be fairly certain that for a lot of you, your actual day to day is a little bit more chaotic. It's, back-to-back meetings. It's notifications, it's emails popping up at 8 o'clock at night. It's, I just look at one more glance at the inbox at 10 o'clock when you're on the sofa every night. How do I know this to be true? Because this was exactly me at one point in time. Rushed mornings, crazy mornings, chaotic mornings, trying to get everybody out the door, and then completely frazzled evenings because you're exhausted. And throw that in with a little bit of constant mum or dad guilt that you're not really present for anyone. If you've got kids, it's pretty soul destroying, if I'm perfectly honest. So you've probably had, those quiet moments where you think, I genuinely can't do this for, another 20, 30 years. I can't keep up this pace. I don't want to be just floating in and out and being here as a mum or here as a dad and not there in other places. Or, as I often thought myself at one point in time, am I now just living to work? Because at one point in time, that is exactly what I felt. That is the real why. That's why most people really want to replace their salary through property. It's not just about money for money's sake. It's about time. It's about control. It's about options. Replacing your salary is, it's kind of code for I want my time back. I want my life back. I want to be able to choose, and rightly so. Why shouldn't you be able to choose? So let's have a look at what replacing your salary with property actually means. And when I say that, I want to strip out the fluff and the glitz and the glam and the glitter and the gold that you will see online. When I say replace your salary with property, I don't mean, quit tomorrow and hope that the universe throws you a net to land on. I don't mean, one magical flip and then you're going to, move and retire in Dubai. I don't mean that if we can get into manifesting and journaling, then the houses in the portfolio will appear and the Lamborghini will be, pulling up into the driveway. No. Although, if you believe a lot of what you see on social media, you will believe that to be true. What I mean is really getting clear on what your life costs, getting honest about, what you want your life to cost, and then building a property income to the point where your job becomes optional, not compulsory. And the key word here is optional. And to be very clear, I am not anti-job. I have lots of friends who, are employees, work a 9 to 5 and thrive on it. They love it. But what I am is anti being trapped by one. And I was trapped in a corporate job 9 years ago. And I do mean trapped. Most of the mentee clients that I work with, replacing a salary for them looks like a mix of, chunky cash up front from the likes of deal sourcing fees, flips and that kind of thing. So that builds your cash pot, and what that does is give you breathing space. Then the next thing you have to look at is a recurring income, something that is predictable month on month, whether that's from rental properties, joint venture projects, portfolio deals. This is the boring in a good way money, but it helps because it drops in every single month. And then you need to have a realistic time scale. Anything between 12 to 18 months is a very good runway and a very good rule of thumb. I replaced my corporate salary in 13 months. So if you use 12 to 18 months as your general rule of thumb, you're on a very, very good trajectory. It's not a one deal fairy tale here, but it's a structured, growing up approach. But then you have to look at the stuff that your brain will tell you, which is code for why you haven't acted on anything yet, why you haven't given this a proper go, or why you've tried, but somewhere along the line fell short. This is where it gets really interesting, because as soon as you think, I'd love to replace my salary with property, your brain, being the protector that it is, will immediately jump in with, but you don't have the time, but you don't have lots of spare money, but what if it doesn't work, or you're too late, or you're too old, or you're too far behind. So let's talk about that for a second, right? The first thing, I don't have the time. Yeah, you're right. You are 100% right, actually. You do not have time for bad strategy. You do not have time to run around doing viewings all day. You don't have the time to be doing DIY refurbs every weekend or treat property like a second full-time job, because you likely don't have a spare 20 hours a week lying around. But what you can do is you can create 8, 10 well-used hours if you stop doom scrolling on YouTube, if you stop starting with 5 different strategies at once and actually get focused on a clear plan. And that's something I'm really big on. And I really do mean really big on with my clients. Again, because a lot of them are corporate or ex-corporate or business owners. And what I like to do is build a corporate-friendly property strategy approach. So this is, think about it like the stuff that works for people with kids, the stuff that works for people with careers and who actually have a life outside of that. Side note, my life outside of property involves being a full-time soccer mom, cheerleader on the touchlines every single week. If it's not soccer, it's Gaelic. If it's not Gaelic, it's taekwondo. If it's not taekwondo, it's swimming. But that is what I do outside of property. Then let's have a look at the second objection, which is I don't have a massive pot of money. Newsflash, newsflash, newsflash. Neither did I. Not only did I not have a massive pot of money, I had negative massive pots of no money. I'm going to remind you of the fact that I started all of this and everything that you see now and hear today. This started from a, very small box room and a Paw Patrol table. Most of my mentees did not rock up to me for help with £100,000 sitting in the bank. Some did, but 97, 98, 99% did not. So that's why I lean so heavily on the likes of sourcing, getting paid very handsomely to find suitable property deals, then raising investor finance, leveraging other people's capital, and portfolio building with partners. So you're not funding everything yourself. Side note, I'm 9 years in this journey. I've built a substantial buy-to-let portfolio, and I have only ever to this day used £40,000 of my own funds to put into any project. That's pretty spectacular after 9 years of building a portfolio and amassed what we have to only ever have parted with 40,000 of my own cash. And the beauty of that is I mastered the art of raising investor finance. That is a skill. If you learn that skill, the world is your oyster. So to be very clear, you don't need to be loaded to start, but you do need to be resourceful. And look, I'll be honest, you do need to be coachable. What if it doesn't work, Danielle? Well, that's a totally fair question. But here's one that's maybe more uncomfortable. What if nothing changes this year, next year, the year after? What do things look like for you at 45, at 50, at 55, at 60, if you keep doing exactly what you're doing now? Same salary if lucky. Although I'll tell you now, the salary that you're on now won't buy you the same lifestyle next year, the year after that, because we've got Rachel Thieves to thank for all of that. Same hours, same guilt, same maybe next year I'll do something for myself. That's risk too. It's just slower, it's more painful, and it's actually easier to ignore. And for anybody out there who's thinking, I'm too late, I should have started this 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Yeah, you're probably right. You absolutely should have, but you didn't. Yet here we are now. I've worked with people in their late 20s. I've worked with people up as far as 68 years of age. The pattern is the same. The people who get clear on their numbers, pick a strategy that fits their life and execute it consistently, well, they move. The people who say, I'll look at it next year, don't. That sounds harsh, but it's entirely true. So if I boil down the work that I do with my private mentee clients, it essentially sits in 3 different buckets. And this is the exact framework that I'm going to walk you through in more detail on next Thursday night's live training. The first thing I'm going to look at is your blueprint, which is essentially your numbers. It's the boring bit, but it is essential. What does your life look like and cost now per month? What would you like it to cost? What figure, if you can hit it consistently, makes leaving your job optional? And then we translate that into approximate sourcing fees, deals per month, deals per year, and then our rental income targets. Without knowing any of this, you're literally chasing deals, throwing mud at the wall and hoping that something sticks. That doesn't work. The second thing that you need to delve deep on is your strategy, which is essentially the how. This is where we stop essentially playing property roulette. You don't need to do every strategy. You need the right ones for somebody who is time poor, has responsibilities outside of work, and doesn't want a second full-time job. For most of my people, the guys that I coach, that looks like property sourcing to create that chunky cash pot, investor-backed portfolio building for that monthly rental income. And all of this is designed to fit into around 8 to 10 focused hours per week. Not 20, not 25, not 30, not 50. Anything between 8 to 10 well-used hours. The third thing that we look at is your next 90 days, essentially your action plan, which is where we bring it back down to earth. This is not your 5-year dream board. This is not your 3-year vision board. It's your next 90 days. What conversations are you having? What agents are we speaking with? What investors are in our pipeline? What training or support do you need? What are you stopping doing that's just wasting time? And this, if I'm perfectly honest, that's where the shift happens. When it moves from, that's a nice idea to, this is actually starting to work. So here's what I want to say to you. If today's episode is hitting a nerve, if you're listening to this and thinking, oh my God, Danielle is literally describing my life right now, well then, good. Because that is exactly who I recorded today's podcast episode for. You are exactly the type of person I help. Corporate or professional. Decent, maybe well paid, but exhausted, frustrated, fed up, secretly terrified of still doing this same thing when you're 55 and desperate to claw back time with your family or time for yourself. It's okay to have time for yourself. So let's talk about the next step. Consider this your official invitation. Next week, I am running a live online workshop. It's called Replace Your Salary with Property in 2026. Be your own boss. It is specifically for time-poor professionals, business owners who want a growing up plan, not the Instagram version, but a growing up plan to make their job optional, if they so choose, in the next 12 months. On this training specifically, I'm going to go deeper into 3 things. Number 1, your 2026 salary replacement blueprint. I'm going to look at the real numbers and what that looks like in actual deals. No pie in the sky, no sticking your finger in your air and seeing which way the wind blows. I'm talking real numbers, actual deals, work backwards. The second thing I want to have a look at is the corporate friendly property strategy, which largely focuses on sourcing and raising investor finance alongside portfolio building that you can fit around your life, not on top of your life. And finally, I want to have a look at your personal time freedom plan, which is essentially starting from the life that you want, which is, maybe you want to have the option to do the school runs, the school pickups. Maybe you want to have a slower day, a slower morning. Maybe you actually want to see your kids in the daylight. Maybe you want to, give you an example today. I decided I'd like to do a bit of shopping after I dropped my son to school, and shopping made me a little bit hungry. So then I dropped in and I had some breakfast. And when I dropped in to have some breakfast, it turned out an old friend was also having breakfast on her own. So we sat together for an hour catching up. Could I do that when I was working a corporate job? No. And I did it all today guilt-free. Am I going to work this evening? Probably. But that's the trade-offs that you make. I have no issue doing that. So we'll work backwards to the targets and actions that make something similar possible for you. This training next week, guys, it's completely free. It's on Zoom. There will be no replay. You have to show up to the live. So if you're sitting here thinking, I really don't want to be still a bit of an absent parent 5 years down the line, or I cannot do another 20 years of this pace of I want something for myself, then please don't just nod at me through Spotify and then just carry on doing what you're doing. Hit the link in the show notes. Get yourself registered for next week's training, and let's actually build you the plan. Make 2026 the year your job becomes optional. Link for this workshop, guys, is in the show notes. I will see you there.